人はいつ死ぬと思う。人に忘れられた時さ。
The Drum Island arc was not at all what I expected. I must admit, this arc even broke me at certain points. I even found myself questioning all those times people told me this was just a silly, goofy pirate show, give it a chance. Surely I must be watching a different series, right? Because even in my little time watching One Piece, it has so many heartbreaking moments. And it also feels like with each subsequent backstory, they only get sadder and sadder to me. Now maybe it is just the more immersed I get into the world, the more connected I feel with each character, each story is bound to hit even harder. But even thinking back to seeing all these moments like Shanks sacrificing his arm for Luffy, or Usopp looking at his dying mother and she's telling him, Usopp, promise me you'll be brave. Or Zoro losing his childhood friend and rival Kuina and pleading with her father to give him her sword so that he could carry her name and her legacy and her dream with him. Or Zeph giving Sanji all of the food even though it meant he had to eat his own foot because he wanted Sanji to live and pursue his dreams. Or after years of Nami's village being tormented by the evil Arlong and her just breaking down and pleading with Luffy, her captain, please help me. All of those moments were so incredibly hard-hitting, and it's like Oda said to himself, how can I top the last one? Oh, I know, let me use an adorable animal and give him a truly depressing backstory. Even with all of that being said, I absolutely love this arc and I can't wait to talk about why. The arc's events were largely kickstarted by Nami falling sick and the crew desperately searching for a doctor to cure her. Now, I did find it interesting to see this different crew dynamic with someone as pivotal as Nami being incapacitated for a large part of the arc, because it kind of showed me just how valuable she truly was. I found Nami really surprised me, especially with how she routinely thinks of Vivi and getting Vivi home before her own health and well-being. Now I'm sure Nami would say it's all because there's a big reward in it for them, but I think that this is largely a facade that Nami puts up, because she tries to hide how much she genuinely cares for people, especially the members of her crew, and Vivi largely feels like an extension of the crew at this point. Now they do have a brief encounter with the main villain of this arc, and while it's quite brief, I must admit if I had one critique of the arc, it's really the main villain of this arc, Wapol. I found him to be a bit of a throwaway villain, especially with how easily the crew deals with him in this first encounter. It never felt to me like he was much of a threat to Luffy in comparison to other villains of the past. Now you could say that was never really the purpose, and I suppose in a way, the main adversary for Luffy throughout this arc was not a tangible villain he had to overcome. Even though he did have to overcome a villain, the main thing to overcome was his growth as a captain and to really understand more of what it means to have people really depending on you. Even right from the crew arriving at Drum Island, Luffy needed to learn this much needed lesson. Because upon arriving to the island, the crew receives quite possibly their least welcoming arrival to any place, because the residents of Drum Island clearly do not like pirates at all. It is crystal clear from the first few shots of the people of Drum Island that they are harboring some scars of a harsh, unknown history. And the idea of scars become a major theme of this arc, as our soon-to-be new crew member Chopper is dealing with many scars of his own. Now, I will say, I find it interesting that Luffy and his crew in many ways represent this shining light of hope to people in an otherwise downcast world, because another major theme of this arc is the people and the residents of Drum Island are living with a sickness, not so much a tangible sickness of the body, but really a sickness almost of the spirit, like they have lost hope. And Luffy and his crew will not only try and heal the scars on Chopper's heart, but also positively impact the people of Drum Island, even if it seems to be a happy accident. But the introduction to Drum Island is interesting because it seems like everything goes wrong immediately when even a jumpy person shoots and it hits Vivi, and in that moment it seemed like all hope was lost. Luffy was about to attack everyone. But I love this moment for Luffy because it's a great learning moment, and by extension it really highlights Vivi and her leadership. Because Vivi's immediate reaction to being shot is to get up, forgetting about her own feelings, to stop Luffy and plead with him to not attack. She reminds him in this moment that you are the captain, Nami's life is depending on you, and she even scolds him by telling him, you are not fit to be the captain. You nearly just threw away Nami's life, because her life is depending on getting help from the residents of Drum Island, and you nearly threw that away. And I love in this moment how we get to see this clear depiction of what a good leader looks like in Princess Vivi. And then you also see someone like Luffy who has a lot to learn as the captain. But I do love the fact that Luffy is willing to listen and he is willing to learn. And this is a major lesson that Luffy learns, is that as the captain, sometimes you have to forego that instinct to just fight people. Shanks tried to teach him that way back, and Vivi has just told him this yet again. Because the easy thing to do in that moment would have just been to attack everyone, but Nami would have died. And I love that Luffy humbles himself in this moment. And just that image of him and Vivi bowing down and pleading with the residents of Drum Island for help. It's an inspiring sight because Luffy has the power to beat up everyone here if he chose to. But sometimes as the captain and the leader, you need to take another approach. Once accepted by the residents of Drum Island, it was fascinating to see this snowy climate with all of its varying sights. One of the things I truly appreciate about One Piece is how diverse all of the different landscapes are and all the different cultures and just everything that you get to see in this wonderful world of One Piece. You see bears walking on 2 feet or giant killer bunnies and all manner of things. But I wanted to take a moment to talk about this other really big moment for Luffy when it comes to character development. Because after they learned some of the unfortunate history of Drum Island, how they only have one doctor, a crazy witch lady named Dr. Kureha, who resides on the top of a mountain, instantly their whole situation seemed incredibly dire. It was almost like fate itself was telling them Nami was gonna die. But I love what Luffy does in this moment, and it felt like he took Vivi's lessons to heart. Because despite the protesting of everyone else around them, Dalton, his other crew members telling them it is an impossible journey, he decides he's going to carry Nami on his back up that mountain, even though they tell him how dangerous it is and how little chance he has of success. Luffy decides in that moment, it's something I have to do. And this becomes, in my opinion, the biggest challenge to Luffy this entire arc. Because on this journey, he got attacked by killer bunnies. That didn't stop him. He got hit by an avalanche. That didn't stop him. When Sanji was incapacitated, he had to carry Sanji and Nami. That didn't stop him. When he reaches the foot of the mountain he has to climb, he has to scale a mountain with his bare hands and bare feet, carrying Nami on his back and Sanji by his teeth up a mountain. That didn't stop him. But it was also quite possibly the most inspirational thing I've ever seen Luffy do. Because both figuratively and literally, he was carrying his crew up a mountain. And to me, this almost felt like the representation of the burden a captain has. And Luffy gave everything he had. This was agonizing to watch at points. Because when it seemed like events of this world had conspired against him and told them, you cannot overcome this, Luffy showed yet again that he is a force of nature and said, I will protect my crew. It was truly such an inspiring moment. I even got chills watching it. I loved every second of it, even the agonizing parts, because it really showed who Luffy was as a character. I briefly wanted to fixate more on Vivi for a moment because I thought through this entire arc she got to display why she is a great leader. But I also wanted to talk about the current leader of Drum Island, this figure Dalton, especially as it relates to his leadership and Vivi's leadership, because a big theme of this arc was leadership, with Luffy's leadership that I talked about, but also Vivi's leadership, Dalton's leadership, and also Wapple's leadership, or lack thereof. Because when Luffy is on his journey, Dalton tells Vivi more of the past of Drum Island, and really fixating in on Dalton, I think he's an interesting case of a leader, because to me he's almost a reluctant leader. He's someone who had a high position under the previous king, and he would just watch as the king would worsen the lives of everyone around, not doing anything, despite the fact that he vehemently disagreed with what Wapple was doing. Dalton to me almost represents the quote, evil triumphs when good men do nothing. And this is a big key of Dalton's character, is he's clearly living with this regret of not doing anything in the past, not doing anything before things got this bad. And in contrast, when you look at the situation Vivi is in, it's quite interesting, because her home of Alabasta is being taken over by Crocodile and Baroque works. But unlike Dalton, who didn't do anything until things got too bad, Vivi is doing everything in her power to fight that evil for her people. She even left her home, went undercover with the very organization that is threatening her people, because she is not going to go down without a fight. And it seems like she may have found people who will fight that fight with her in Luffy and his crew. And I think it's interesting that even as Dalton is describing all the evil things Wapple did, I love how visibly angry Vivi gets with the idea that a leader would ever treat their people like this. And I also think it's an interesting detail that Dalton recognizes Vivi. Now, he had seen her in the past a long time ago at a meeting of the world leaders when she was just a little girl, which was also a great flashback to see, because it showed even from a young age how great of a leader Vivi would be. When she was slapped by Wapol and she set her own feelings aside, taking that lesson she taught Luffy to heart. And she de-escalated the situation because she knew it would mean war and people would die if she let it get out. But I love the detail that Dalton doesn't fully recognize her from just her looks, but it's only after hearing how much she cares and hearing her talk about what a leader should be like that he recognizes without a doubt it was Princess Vivi. Now, I do love the fact that Dalton does get to prove himself when Wapol arrives back on the island and Dalton doesn't even hesitate to rush in to try and stop him for good. And although Dalton comes up short and he gets injured protecting the people of Drum Island, I still thought he got to redeem himself, and it set up the future fight with Luffy and Wapol, where Luffy must succeed and be the strength of the people of Drum Island when they are without their own strength. Now, before diving into the truly sad moments of Chopper and his backstory, I did want to mention I still felt like this arc had a decent amount of comedy throughout. I thought Zoro had a lot of the funny moments with his whole basic side quest of getting lost, and even when Vivi and Usopp run into him, not recognizing Usopp because his face was so swollen until he saw his nose, or some of Luffy's actions with Chopper, just some lighthearted moments. So I still felt like there were those moments, but there were also a lot of very hard-hitting moments in this arc as well. Now at this point, you're probably wondering, when are you going to get to the true highlight of this arc, Tony Chopper? Well, the answer to that is now. And I must say, I just love everything about Chopper. He is truly adorable, and I just fell in love with his character immediately. But the fact that he is so adorable makes his backstory all the more tragic. But first, let me just take a moment to talk about his character design. I mean, everything about this design is just perfect. From the look of his cute blue nose, which obviously has many parallels to Rudolph, and throughout this arc there are many parallels to Santa, and I even like the idea of the blue nose making him different, but he's different in a way that not even Rudolph experienced, because Chopper was even more ostracized than someone like Rudolph. Additionally, Chopper had one of the cutest voices, where everything he said, whether he was angry, sad, just talking normally, it somehow seemed cute. For context, I did read key moments in the manga, but mostly I just watched the arc in its entirety in the sub, so I got to hear the Japanese voice actor for Chopper, which I thought had the perfect voice for Chopper, but I even switched to dub at certain points for Chopper, and I found that the dub voice was surprisingly cute. Honestly, Chopper's dub voice was instantly one of my favorite dub actors. But it wasn't just his look that was adorable, but also his personality, where he has this thing where he can't hide the way he's truly feeling. And even the sound of his feet was just perfect with that little pitter-patter. In my opinion, One Piece truly designed an unhateable character. I'd be genuinely curious to know how someone could hate on Chopper after this arc. And instantly I fell in love with his character. I knew he had to join the crew as a doctor. Now it did help that I had seen him in certain pictures with the crew, so I kind of figured, yeah, he's going to join the crew, and he seemed perfect even without knowing that though. Even when I get into his backstory, everything about his backstory seemed like it was tailor-made for someone like Luffy to come along in the present and rescue him, to take him out to sea and become the pirate he always wanted to be. It was great to see Nami getting healed from her sickness, and even some of the funny interactions between Luffy and Chopper. How the first major interaction Luffy has with Chopper is he tries to eat him. I thought that was pretty funny. But then how Luffy immediately, like me, falls in love with Chopper and realizes I have to get him on my crew. And he tells Chopper, you're going to be my friend, you're going to join my crew, regardless of how you feel. That's not entirely what he said, but in a roundabout way, that's what Luffy meant. And once Luffy decides you're joining his crew, you almost surely are going to join the crew. But I love how the arc built up the mystery of Chopper's backstory, because there were certain details that were dropped throughout it. Such as Chopper was very curious about pirates, he was very interested in the idea of friends, but he was also scared of humans, and he was scared of the notion that he could have friends, so it really made you wonder what exactly happened to him. Even when Dr. Kureha mentioned to the crew, do you think you could heal the scars on his heart? It just got into this idea of the residents of Drum Island dealing with scars, and even the sickness of the heart that was going around. But the more I learned about Chopper's backstory, the more heartbreaking it truly became. Even first learning he was rejected by the reindeer because he was different with that blue nose, the many parallels to Rudolph, and then after consuming the human devil fruit, they just totally kicked him out. And then if that wasn't bad enough, when he turned to humans, they didn't accept him, they rejected him, they fired at him. It was just truly depressing to see this person in the world that felt like they had no place in this world, despite the fact that Chopper has one of the purest hearts, which only makes it that much sadder. And it felt like nobody would ever accept Chopper. That is until Dr. Hiraluk. And at first upon meeting Hiraluk, I didn't really know what to think of him. Obviously, he was not the best doctor, he was kind of wacky, and in fact, most people referred to him as a quack. And although that nickname seems a little harsh, I thought he earned it. But despite all of his faults, I came to really like Hiraluk because I learned that he had such a pure heart, and his only desire was to make everyone feel better, whether it was physically, mentally, or even spiritually, and he would often talk about his desire to cure the sickness of the heart. And his lifelong dream was to make cherry blossoms bloom on Drum Island, a feat that seemed impossible. And interestingly enough, I see a lot of parallels between Dr. Hiraluk and Luffy. That may sound strange at first, but when you look at it, you have two very eccentric figures who live by their own rules, have crazy dreams that people mock them for, but will do everything in their power to see them come true. And I love seeing Chopper and Hiraluk's friendship kind of bloom and how close they grew together. I love how Hiraluk told Chopper about pirates and how great they were, and how they even made their own Jolly Roger with a promise, talking about how the flag represented their belief that nothing is impossible, and how it represented Hiraluk's desire to cure every sickness in the world, which is a dream that Chopper now carries with him. And by raising this flag, he vows to fight like pirates do. And so I love this idea that Chopper's mentor and his friend Hiraluk built up this idea of how great pirates were, despite the fact that many people, including the residents of Drum Island, don't really like pirates, and understandably so. But Chopper is different because Chopper is someone who feels he doesn't really have a place in the world. But even in the backstory, Hiraluk told him how great pirates were and how great it was to sail the seas, telling him, "I want you to go out to sea one day." So seeing all of this, instantly I couldn't help but think Luffy truly seems perfect for this character, because here you have this character Chopper who feels like he doesn't have a place in the world, and who better than Luffy, who's kind of a wacky character, to come along and rescue him and make him a part of his crew. But the backstory quickly turned really sad, and seeing that moment where Dr. Hiraluk kicks Chopper out because he didn't want Chopper to stay around and watch him die, so he kicks him out because he genuinely wants what's best for him. He says, "Go out, live your life." And just seeing how confused Chopper was hard to watch. But if that wasn't bad enough, when Chopper wouldn't quite leave and he hurt himself, and he looked up and he was like, "Doctor, I hurt myself." And Dr. Hiraluk shoots at him because he wants him to get lost, seeing that look of betrayal on Chopper's face where he was just so confused, like, why? Why would you do this to me? Is it about me? For a character that didn't feel like he had a place in this world, to have finally found a friend and then feel like that was being snatched away from him and he had no idea why. It basically broke me in that moment. I mean, just that tearful Chopper running away, asking like, "Why, doctor? Like, why would you do this to me?" Now, I did like the fact that Chopper learned that Dr. Hiraluk was about to die when he overheard a conversation, and even in that moment, Chopper decided he was going to risk his life to go and get some mushrooms that he genuinely thought would heal Dr. Hiraluk. And he turns up with the mushrooms, his body broken, and he's just looking at the doctor, very happy, despite the immense pain I'm sure he was feeling. And he's just like, "Doctor, I got these for you. Now you can live." And if that wasn't a big enough gesture, then seeing how Dr. Hiraluk, knowing that these mushrooms would kill him, decided, "I'm going to eat them because of what you did, Chopper. I really appreciate it." That was just incredible. And in that moment, Dr. Hiraluk really saw that Chopper had carried his dreams with him. That even though he would die, Chopper would live on to see that any sickness could be cured. Because even though Chopper messed up and these mushrooms would not save him, the fact that Chopper genuinely believed any sickness could be cured was enough for Dr. Hiraluk. And Dr. Hiraluk had the crazy dream to make cherry blossoms bloom in Drum Island, which seemed impossible. And just when it seemed like he was on the brink of maybe making it a reality, his time would end. But I gotta say, this was one hell of a way to go out. Because even though he was tricked to going up to Wapple's castle because he thought that the 20 MDs, the last remaining doctors, were sick, when he figured out that he was tricked, he wasn't upset at all. In fact, he was actually comforted by the fact that the doctors were well and safe, showing that he genuinely only cared for the well-being and safety of others. He didn't care about his own well-being. And when he realizes he's about to die, he has this legendary quote.
人はいつ死ぬと思う。人に忘れられた時さ。
I mean, that was a phenomenal quote, and immediately it reminded me of the King of the Pirates, the thing that kickstarted this entire series. When the King of the Pirates was being executed, it was like he was saying, I will not die, because my dream will live on through people like Luffy, who take that hope out onto the seas. And even his final moments, I love the fact that he was thinking about Chopper, because Dr. Kureha even told Chopper these mushrooms, they would kill him, these were poisonous mushrooms. And Chopper rushes to the scene. He feels like he's responsible, like he's the one who killed Dr. Hiriluk. But even in Dr. Hiriluk's final moments, he thinks to himself, you didn't kill me, Chopper. Don't worry about that. And I love that he refers to Chopper as his son, and he says, my son will soon be here. Please don't hurt him. And as a final send-off, he says, I lived a good life. Goodbye, Chopper. His final moments were all about his adoptive son. Just an incredible way for a character to go out. I thought that this backstory was truly incredible because it made me understand Chopper perfectly. It all made perfect sense why he was so afraid of opening himself up to new people, and why someone like Luffy, who was a great pirate who would come along, was perfect for Chopper. But now we shift to the major battle of this arc, which was between Wapol and his men versus Luffy and Chopper, and I thought that the battle was good since it gave Chopper a chance to prove himself and also the payback for Wapol tricking his mentor. But for Luffy, I thought the fight was okay since I never really thought of Wapol as much of a challenge to Luffy in comparison to other adversaries of the past. However, I still think that there were some highlights of the fight, and the main highlights of the fight were Chopper standing up for himself and Luffy refusing to let Chopper and Hiriluk's pirate flag fall. Because Luffy has no idea what this flag means exactly to Chopper. He doesn't know about Dr. Hiriluk. All he knows is that this flag is important to Chopper because it's a pirate flag. And so seeing Luffy even absorb a direct hit to protect Chopper's flag was such a powerful moment. Because the way I see it, in Luffy's mind, Chopper was already a member of the crew whether he realized it or not. And I even love how in that moment Chopper was looking up at Luffy and he says, so that's what a pirate is. And he has no idea how right he is, because in my mind, Luffy exemplifies what a pirate should be in the One Piece world. And it was nice to see Chopper stand up for himself and use his Rumble Ball and his 7 different forms. That was another highlight. But even the fact that he got to take down Wapol's 2 right-hand men, that was a nice detail. Now of course Luffy handles Wapol. It was relatively easy for him. But despite the fact that it was easy for Luffy, it still was a pretty significant act because nobody else on Drum Island before Luffy arrived could take down Wapol. And even seeing Dalton's reaction just in total amazement and then being told after that that was Wapol he saw flying through the skies, he could barely believe that Luffy had come in and basically freed their nation. And Luffy to me is almost becoming more of a revolutionary than just a typical pirate in many ways, because he seems to almost be going from place to place, either defending that place or even just freeing that place. And I imagine he's going to do the same thing when they go to Alabasta. And I love this moment after the fighting where Chopper decides he's leaving with Luffy, he's going to join his crew. Now I will say Chopper's goodbye was very emotional, but I loved it, because sure, it seemed a little cold-hearted when Dr. Kureha was chasing him away, throwing things at him, yelling insults at him, telling him he was ungrateful, but I assume it was all because she just wanted to make sure he left, and she knew this would be the best way of getting him to go. But seeing that final shot of Drum Island as the crew is leaving, and Dr. Kureha completes Dr. Hiriluk's work by firing up the cherry blossoms into the sky, it was just a perfect conclusion of the arc to see Dr. Hiriluk's dream realized in those final moments. And I honestly believe in many ways Luffy and his crew represent kind of that shining light I was talking about that could kind of heal the sickness that many people in the One Piece world probably feel, the sickness of the heart, where they feel like they've lost hope. And I feel like Luffy's going to do much of the same when he goes to Alabasta. Well, that concludes my thoughts on the Drum Island arc. I thought it was a spectacular arc. Really excited to move on to the Alabasta arc next. It looks like it's a bigger arc, but I've heard great things about it. So if you want to see my thoughts on future One Piece arcs, please consider liking and subscribing. And if you made it to this point in the video, I thank you for watching, and till next time.